Our clothing, like a mirror, reflects the history of civilization. Today, it is more than just a shell. Fashion and style have become a new way of self-expression. To see deep symbolism in material things and speak with their clothing, personal belongings, and rituals. That is what Kazakhs are famous for. This is why history of a national costume is a whole new astonishing world, revealing the very essence of our mentality. There is a well-known stereotype stating that men are indifferent to fashion trends. And it didn't appear out of the blue. Fashion is a changeable matter that drags everyone into it, even men, whose conservative and logical mindsets make it so hard to follow the trends, unlike women do, for instance. However, history has proved that males have paid a careful attention to fashion. During the times of Renaissance, for instance, it was young men who flaunted classical tunics and extraordinary party-colored stockings. Also, men of the 16th century brought that pretentious mannerism into Spanish fashion that resulted in males wearing excessive amount of jewelry. And the most famous fashionista of that era was a man, not woman. Today, Louis XIV of France would definitely be called a metrosexual. All of them, Spanish dons and English dandies, were equally concerned with their style and choice of clothing. In comparison with liberal and sedentary Europe, nomads of the Great Steppe were less concerned with fashion. However, on numerous occasions, they had become the trendsetters. Pants that today are popular among both males and females were their invention. And also heels. But first things first. And that is not a mere allegation. The first and maybe the most ancient pair of pants were found by German archaeologists when they were excavating the tomb in eastern Turkestan. The burial is dated back to 3200 BC. It was the same period of time when Troy and the Hittite Empire have fallen on the other side of the continent. This was the oldest finding of the pair of pants, and it is doubtless that nomads have invented them. Soon, this fashion was picked up by everyone else.
Надо обратиться вообще к очень древнему периоду. Это еще времена античности, завоевания Александра.
We need to look back at ancient period, times of Alexander of Macedon and his conquest. He was the one who first saw pants, this Central Asian invention, and introduced them into European costume. Soon, the Romans started wearing pants, just after they realized how comfortable they were. It wouldn't be very convenient for horse traveling, though. In the future, not only pants, but even certain elements of Central Asian suit of armor was appropriated. Russian armor, in particular, has lots of similarities with Central Asian.
Русский доспех во многом общий с центральноазиатским доспехом.
All of these data scholars draw from written sources and archaeological findings. And that is also how they have reconstructed the image of our predecessors. In this regards, Uralday Kurgan findings were the most valuable for both Kazakh and foreign researchers. Those findings allowed them to get a first-hand view of Saka and Scythians' material culture samples. It was their description that allowed to recreate this authentic male costume. I am wearing Saka Tigra Hauda, our costume. This tribe mostly lived in Jitusu, Saka with pointed hats. That is how they were called back then. They inhabited this area, Almaty region mostly in the first millennium BC. Saka were mostly known because of their pointed hats. Every tribe had their hats made in certain shape and color. That is how they were able to tell each other apart. Every single piece of clothing I'm wearing fully corresponds to the era and is based upon archaeological findings of Kazakh, Russian, and Chinese researchers. Saka habitat included Altai, Siberia, Xinjiang, and the territory of modern Mongolia. It was a huge area. representative of a certain subculture that considers history as a present, not the past. Restoration artists recreate the way of living, crafts, and clothing of a certain era, a certain state. They give us an opportunity to touch historical things with our own hands, things we have only seen at museum displays. I devoted myself to historical reconstruction from the very childhood. In the junior school, I was an avid history learner and reader. I was reading The Cruel Age, as well as works by Yesin Berlin and other classics. And because at that time I was attending art school, I always wanted to express myself in a creative way. The years have passed, and Daniyar couldn't help but notice how widespread historical reconstruction has become in the West. The artist soon realized that his childhood hobby can become his business of a lifetime. I saw that there is a whole international community dedicated to historical reconstruction, a huge community that includes all classes of society. Today, historical reconstruction is a very popular activity. Combining entertainment and learning, it allows both amateurs and historians to reconstruct the whole settlements in a form they once existed. And this is especially fair to nomads, whose contribution to the development of global civilization was hugely underestimated. It was once believed that nomads haven't produced anything, and therefore haven't contributed towards global cultural fund. However, the more objective and modern perception of history proves, including ones made in clothing industry, became widespread because of the nomads' conquests. Nomads are an integral part of global culture, and this existing gap is an obstacle on the way of understanding other cultures, because it is impossible that certain things have just appeared out of the blue and then became widespread among all other sedentary nations. Only experts know that these things came along with the conquerors. According to the artist, experimental archaeology, that is how historical reconstruction is called sometimes, can significantly change the perception of history. Because in order to recreate a certain historical item, one has to study at least some basic scientific literature. That is how, over time, experts can reveal some new facets in the history of national costume.
На мне сакские мягкие сапожки, которые по сути как бы кожаные чулки.
I am wearing Saka boots that look more like leather stockings. Saka wide trousers is yet another invention that nomads presented to the world. I mean cavalry trousers. Their most distinctive feature is this big gusset that allows to spread legs wider and makes horse riding more comfortable, without any concerns that pants can be torn. These pants are loose and very comfortable, very practical. Also, I am wearing this shirt. It is very comfortable too. It protects me from the sun, and it is great for cold days. It is quite loose, and it is not restricting my movements in any way. This is what is so special about ancient clothing. It is extremely comfortable, practical, and quite loose too.
Свойство всей древней одежды то, что она максимально удобна и практична, никак не сковывает движений.
Let us now time travel to 3,000 years forward. We can see that nomads' costume hasn't changed in a single way. And this can be easily explained from a practical viewpoint. Why would one change their clothing if it's great for both war and peace? Our ancestors might have thought, in terms of fashion, Turkic warriors were as practical as it was possible. Speaking of their clothing, it hasn't changed at all. The same white pants as nomads used to wear in the first millennium BC, the Kazakhs were wearing up until the 20th century. And the same shirt or robe. Robes, however, have changed slightly. They became a little bit longer, but the style remained the same, loose and with the wraparound. The boot style has also changed a bit, with the introduction of saptama, solid boots with heavy heels. They have replaced soft Saka boots.
в отличие от сакских мягких каблуков.
Today, heels have become a distinctive feature of female footwear. And some might even think that it was women who invented and introduced heels into fashion. However, any expert will say that initially, heels were used by horsemen to have better grip of the stirrups. A nomad had to be able to become one with the horse. He was supposed to be mobile, and in this regards, fashion wasn't among his priorities. I want to express my gratitude to our ancestors. Despite the fact that they have invented heels for a different purpose, they now adorn female feet. Now, I wonder what Turkic nation was sporting the most stylish male footwear. The majority of nomads were wearing, if not identical, but still very similar footwear. For horse riding, men would wear high-heeled, pointed-toe boots. In everyday life, they would wear comfortable boots with smaller heels. Footwear design would depend on how wealthy their owner was. However, people of that time would still prefer practicality over style. These were the requirements of Kazakh, Uzbek, Kyrgyz, Tuvan, and Kavkaz men. And only Tatars would think differently. Traditional Tatar footwear, ichigs, was initially made for home usage, and over time the sole was added to it. These boots, despite the fact that they were made in leather mosaic style, were waterproof. Shoemaker would use leather of different colors, cut the stencils, and hand it all to a craftswoman. The craftswoman would sew it with wax thread. She would make several rows of stitches, and that's how these beautiful boots were made.
И вот таким образом формировался красивый сапог.
At first glance, one might think that there is only women footwear on display. But that is not the case. Tatar men, if they could afford it, would also prefer ornamented ichigs.
Изображались традиционные татарские орнаменты. Мы можем...
The boots were decorated with traditional Tatar ornaments, hearts and tulips mostly. This embroidery was used on both national costumes and in boots decoration.
В костюмах, так и вот сапожках.
Even today, Tatar girls are still wearing footwear like this. However, Tatar men have opted for more practical and contemporary style. The same thing happened in Kazakhstan. Ethnical male footwear can be seen only at festivals or in theatrical shows. However, more and more shoemaking ateliers are opening in our country every year. Who knows, soon we might discover our very own Jimmy Choo and Manolo Blahnik. To find out how modern steppe dwellers' everyday footwear is made, we visited an exclusive shoemaking atelier. Shoes that are made here will always fit. After all, it is meticulously customized to suit every single client. In fact, it is very similar to medieval methods of garment making. These were the times when there was no such thing as a mass production, so every single piece of clothing was customized individually. Everything starts with taking measurements and creating a model that completely repeats clients' physical features. Based on this model, the pattern is made, the basis for further manipulations. After the designer has finished creating the model and the pattern, the client is choosing the leather, glossy or suede, depending on what he wants. In this case, he has chosen mature lamb skin of a great quality. This color is called hot chocolate. And now we are going to start tracing the pattern.
И начинаем размещать лекала. Поскольку это самая такая...
This is the most visible part of the footwear, and it has to be the most durable. That is the exact place where scratches usually appear. That's why here we use this part of the skin. It is the best part, from animals' back and neck.
Вот эта часть, где спина животного переходит в шею.
This part of hide is called butt. butt is the most durable and thick part of the hide. Leather made of it is the densest and sturdiest. It is a great material for the front side of the footwear.
Союзку размещаем на чепрачной части шкурки.
Front side will be made of the butt. Because any leather is stretchy, it is important that it is placed horizontally. Now, after we have traced the front side of the pattern, we need to turn it upside down to make the same pattern for both right and left feet.
И потом ее переворачиваем для того, чтобы она отзеркалила правая и левая нога.
Of course, quality of any footwear mostly depends on the choice of leather. That's why different parts of footwear are made of certain parts of hide.
Выбираем самые хорошие места.
When choosing the best parts of the hide, we need to avoid edges. They can become fringy, and once sewn, the leather can break. That's why we never use these parts of the hide. We always opt for the best ones. That's what makes quality footwear.
Самые плотные, самые такие хорошие, качественные места для того, чтобы обувь действительно получилась качественная.
After all patterns are ready, they are glued to the interfacing. Under high temperature, it will tightly stick to the leather. Once the upper is ready, shoemaker starts to work up the footwear.
Края все надо обработать.
All edges should be polished. This work is performed manually. Shoemaker is carefully checking all the edges and fixes all the mistakes.
Вот так вот надо специальным ножичком вот так вот срезать.
After that, a special rubber glue is used. In 10 minutes, it dries up and the folding begins.
Смотрите, сгибается на ширину 5
You see, it is folded like this, just 5 millimeters, and then it is fixed with this hammer. This process helps to achieve symmetry and details. We want this folding line to be perfectly even, as well as a stitch line.
чтобы потом строчка красиво легла.
After that, we make holes for shoelaces. They are called eyelets. The next stage of the process is lining. We use the one that our client chooses. In this case, it is wool. All the parts are glued together and then stitched on a sewing machine. Now, the other shoemaker is in charge. He inserts rigid backstays, spreads the glue on the surface, and then tightens the whole shoe.
Кожу вытягиваем,
Leather is tightened and fixed.
закрепляем.
This part is repeated all over the whole upper. Then, the lining is glued to the base, and excessive material and the folds are being cut with the knife.
Оставляем высыхать.
We will now leave it to dry out and start the same process with the other half pair.
Нашей обуви.
And only after all these complex manipulations are performed, the heel can finally be attached to the shoe. If we don't take modern equipment and materials into account, it is safe to say that the whole process of shoemaking remains the same as it was in nomadic times. Here are the pictures featuring Kazakhs of the 19th century. Original photographs are kept in Kunstkamera. These photos prove that, for many centuries, male costume hasn't changed much. Over time, materials, styling, and decorations might have changed slightly, but the basic look and the cut remain the same.
Оставались практически неизменными.
We can see the same old shirt koilek, wide trousers, and the same outerwear. Despite the transition to half-sedentary and sedentary lifestyles, nomadic fashion was preserved. Even winter male hat, dimak, or malakai, bears a distant resemblance with Saka warrior's hat. And that is another proof that steppe men were conservative in their clothing choices. Today, nomadic style is being thoroughly studied by designers and couturiers. Yelena Przezhonskaya, for instance, has presented her peculiar steppe-styled fashion collection on the 44th Ukrainian Fashion Week. With her works, she was trying to emphasize the interaction between nature and human beings. To create this image, she used natural fabrics and goat-down shawls. Surprisingly, female outfits resembled ethnographic costumes of nomadic men. Lately, we have noticed a great interest in Central Asia. It all started with the textile. But now, hats and decoration elements of warrior costumes became more and more popular. Especially, this can be traced in Alexander McQueen's and Vivienne Westwood's recent collections. It is a long process. I think we can see some bright prospects in this regard. On a larger scale, it is safe to assume that the East has always been considered fashionable among Europeans. Arabic, Iranian, and Asian eclectics have always attracted their minds and hearts. And of course, it was reflected in their clothing. Europeans have always favored everything exotic, unknown. They have always been attracted to traditions and culture of Eastern people. And they have always been keen in finding new fashion solutions. Eastern fashion has become very popular during the Crusades and also during Napoleon's campaign in Egypt. Central Asia was harder to reach, and that's why Europeans were introduced to its fashion and culture much later.
И, соответственно, знакомство с этой культурой состоялось намного позднее.
During Soviet period, Kazakhstan has become a rather closed country, and that was an obstacle that didn't allow foreigners to meet local culture sooner. And local fashion wasn't popular either, again due to political reasons. Traditional kamzol, even with its side splits, wasn't the most comfortable clothing for plowing or tractor driving. But it didn't mean that male steppe outfit faded into oblivion. It still was able to find its way into fashion. As for the ethnographic costume, today it is popular only among historical reenactors and fashion theaters. I have only recently realized how traditional Kazakh costumes look like. In 20 years, I have changed my perception of our costume completely. If you look at our artists, theater and cinema actors, you will understand. Muslim Jumagaliyev is the founder and the permanent manager of our Longevity Fashion Theater. While mass culture was transforming Kazakh costume into something with laces and fringes, Muslim was trying to preserve its traditional look. I was making costumes of all periods, starting with Andronova culture, 38th century BC. Then Saka, Huns, and Turkic costumes followed. The Golden Horde, costumes of all periods, including the end of 18th century. They are called giant batirs. For more than 20 years, these tall men and women amaze people, not just with their heights, but also with their outfits that are 100% historically true. This costume is made of red deer hide, with cast and glue interfacing and organic animal extracts. It is decorated with hardwood elements to protect a person from animals' teeth and claws. Such a vivid and impressive national costume is of a great interest for foreign public. In 2018, theater has been touring in more than 32 countries, and there are more tours to follow over the next 2 years. It is something that always attracts people's attention, something that people admire because of its uniqueness and peculiarity. And that is also something that can help us to stand out on the global fashion stage. And that is not the end to the history of the steppe warrior's costume. At some point, it will definitely reappear on runways. because the fashion is cyclical. And if public has appreciated the image of Kazakh warrior at least once, it will, for sure, become a trend again.